with some books that I just got and I'm very excited to get into um, when I finish the Mapmaker Chronicles because I've been reading those and I'm excited to get into my next series. And my next series is going to be this unicorn series, the first book, The Midnight Unicorn. I'm going to read the first few chapters, so if it's something that you like, then you can get it and read it yourself. There's actually 4 books in the series, and they're pretty thick, so it's a decent sized book. There's 4 books. There's The Midnight Unicorn, which I'm going to read, and then there is The Blazing Unicorn, The Cursed Unicorn, and The Darkest Unicorn. So I can't wait to get into these. Today we are just going to read from The Midnight Unicorn, and I'll read the back like I normally do, just to kind of give you an idea of what the book is about, and then I will jump in. So, if you thought you'd heard every fairy tale, then think again. In a faraway kingdom, 2 girls live separate lives. Alette is a sorcerer's daughter, growing up in the wilderness of the west. Audrey is a baker's daughter, growing up in the warmth of the east. The 2 girls are so different, and yet something draws them together. Does their connection lie in the mystery of their pasts, or in the identical pendants they wear around their necks? One thing is certain, the girls will find each other, and when they do, a past they never knew existed will lead them to a future they never could have dreamed of. Danger, mystery, and magic await. Their story began once upon a time, but how will it end? All right. The font isn't too small either. It's actually kind of pretty font, so it's pretty decent sized font. So pretty good sized story, and I'm excited to get into it. Trying to see if it said how many chapters there were. Let's see. 15 chapters. And it doesn't look like the chapters. At least some of them. Well, the last chapter is very short. Alrighty, so Chapter 1, The Snapped Bough. The city of Essendor stood on a hill, a stone castle at its summit. Small but sturdy houses were squeezed into every available space, and stone steps twisted and turned down the hill. One warm day in early autumn, the red swallowtail flags fluttered on the turrets of the castle. A new queen had just married, sat on the throne, and there was a celebratory feel in the air. Bunting hung in the market square, where some street performers had attracted a crowd. An arched bridge led through a gap in the city's walls and across the river to the fields beyond. 2 young mothers crossed the bridge with their broods. One had an infant strapped to her back, and the other held a child by the hand. 5 more children walked or tottered along behind. The families were off to gather the first new berries of the season. They would each make a pie at the end of the day, and if any berries were left over after baking, they would box them up and sell them at market. The hedgerows were so laden with fruit that they could pick blackberries all morning and never exhaust the supply. Some of the older children minded the younger ones. The others got to work, although the purple stains around their mouths and the lack of fruit in their baskets gave them away. The sweet orangey smell of wild bergamot blew on the breeze. Time passed quickly, with singing, joking, and city gossip. The women wondered about the price of goat cheese at the dairy stall, whether this warmer weather would last, and why the queen's brother had left Essendor so quickly. They were so engrossed in their chat that they barely noticed one of their youngest break away in search of his own entertainment. An old willow tree with an inviting Y-shaped trunk stood close by. The little one climbed up with fearless agility. He inched along a bough which hung over the river below. On another day, all may have been well, but today the wind was blowing in the wrong direction, or the stars were not aligned as they should be. The brittle bough, which had held fast all summer, snapped. The sound of a branch splintering and a piercing shriek alerted the mothers. They dropped their baskets and rushed to the source of the cry, trying to piece together what had happened. The child had fallen 6 feet and now clung on to a rock protruding from the steep bank above the river. He was just 2 summers old. He saw his family looking and cried out in anguish. As the mother panicked, her eldest child began to scramble down the bank to retrieve him, but the descent was slow, and the little one's pink fists could not hold on. His grip loosened, and he tumbled down the bank, head over heels in a sickening aerobatic display. He vanished under the water as the movement of the river turned him onto his stomach and carried him along. The mother gasped as if winded, and the elder sister screamed, "He can't swim!" The other children raced along the river, trying to keep up with the little boy as he tumbled along in the river's current. The mothers followed, making sure the younger ones were with them. They didn't want to lose any more of their number. For a few yards, trees and overgrowth shielded the boy from view. Then a little farther along, the ground level dropped, and there was a gap allowing access to the river. By the looks of things, anglers, possibly poachers, had fished there in the past. The family scrambled through and looked frantically up and down the river. The boy should have reached this point by now. His mother stared into the flowing water, holding on to her friend for support. The child was nowhere to be seen. But then, from behind them came a cry, a powerful cry from a healthy little boy. There he was on the bank, shivering behind a bush, wet through, but unharmed. His mother rushed to him, hugged him tightly to her chest, stripped off his clothes and wrapped her shawl around him. He was mottled and red from the cold, and would soon be covered in bruises, but he was still able to cry lustily. His mother's embraces and some blackberries from the basket soon soothed him. The woman looked around for someone to thank. It was inconceivable that her son, who was unable to swim, could have made his way to the side of the rapidly flowing river and clambered up the steep bank, but there was no rescuer in sight. "Who pulled you out?" she asked the child. "Horse," said the little boy. "Horse with a horn." He indicated on his head where a horn might be found. The 2 women looked at one another questioningly. "A unicorn," whispered the mother in disbelief. The boy nodded. "One horn." "Was the unicorn silver?" asked the friend, who knew a thing or two about such animals. "With a spiraling horn and a flowing mane?" The boy shook his head. "Like midnight." "A midnight unicorn," whispered the mother to her friend, and louder into the empty woods. "Unicorn, if you are here, thank you for saving my child." From that day, he was known as the Boy River. His story spread quickly across the city and enjoyed some fame, which was soon forgotten. But the Boy River never forgot that he was the first to set eyes on the midnight unicorn of Essendor. 5 years later. Chapter 2. The Protected City. There were the usual daily grumbles. Sometimes the crops failed, the price of goat cheese remained high, the local tavern shut too early on a Saturday, but overall this is a happy time for the inhabitants of Essendor, and bigger disasters were averted. 3 straw-thatched cottages burned to the ground in the night, but all the inhabitants escaped unhurt. A wolf was seen creeping into a field of sheep, but not a single animal was harmed. Foreign invaders approached from the island of the north, but were thwarted at Essendor's gates. And always there were reports of a mysterious unicorn, with sparkling jet fur and a shimmering white horn. Many of the spectacular rescues took place in the dead of night, which gave the creature its moniker. To the inhabitants of Essendor, the protector was known as the Midnight Unicorn. Every day the king and queen looked down on their subjects and smiled. Their city was protected, and their people were happy. What was more, the royal couple had good news of their own. The queen was to be blessed with a child. The sign. Nanny selected a speckled brown hen's egg from a bowl on the side. It had been gathered this morning by the kitchen hand. What the queen needed was a good nourishing breakfast to give her strength and to help the baby grow. The cook here couldn't be trusted. He was an imbecile who served all manner of strange things for the royal breakfast, like bread and fruit. Nanny would just have to make it herself, a bowl of scrambled eggs with lots of butter and ground white pepper. Nanny cracked the egg into a bowl. The clear white slid out of the shell, complete with not one, but two rich yellow yolks. Nanny stared for a moment. A double yolk. She had not seen such a thing for some time. All the better for the queen. A lot of goodness in a hen's egg came from the yolk. She reached for another egg and cracked it alongside the first. 4 yolks now bobbed in the bowl. 2 eggs, each with 2 yolks? This was highly unusual. Nanny clapped her hands to her cheeks. "It's a sign!" she cried. "A sign as clear as day!" The kitchen hand and the scullery maid came rushing in to see what all the shrieking was about. Nanny held out the bowl of unwhisked eggs and smiled broadly. "The queen is expecting twins," she announced. Egg on the drapes. Queen Bea did not take the news well. In fact, she threw the bowl of eggs across the room from her dressing table. "I do not want eggs. I do not like eggs. I am not unwell. I am simply with child. I am not expecting twins." The lady's maid sidled into the room with her head lowered and began scraping egg from the bed drapes. The king threw her a sympathetic look and cleared his throat. "Nanny did say that it was quite clear. 2 yolks, twice in a row." "Ha!" said the queen. "I am not taking the word of a servant on such matters. This is all silly superstition." "She is not a servant, my love. She is my trusted Nanny, and she has been right about many things over the years. She predicted the death of the old footman. Bork did not forget." Bork was 112. I can assure you that my breakfast menu has no connection whatsoever to my unborn child. It was not even my breakfast of choice. The king paced up and down the bedroom. "I know she can be old-fashioned, but it would be unwise to ignore such a clear sign. Nanny has some experience in such matters. She cared for me and my 6 siblings when we were just babes in arms." "This is the woman who told me not to play the piano while I am with child, as it will make them too flighty," complained the queen. "I will not accept servants' fancies. I need to consult with someone I trust. Send for my sorcerer." The sorcerer. The young sorcerer Mineo was a favorite of the queen. Nobody knew quite where he had come from, but it was well known that he had served in his apprenticeship with a great master. When he was ready to practice on his own, he came to Essendor. News of his prowess in the magical arts soon reached the royal court. He was different than the old seers and magicians who set up homes in the south of the city. His spells were experimental but precise. He cured a mute woman who had not spoken for 17 years. He transformed a billy goat to a nanny goat, which gave the creamiest milk for miles. The queen summoned him to cast spells for her pleasure. He permanently freed the roses in the royal garden from pests. Now they bloomed all year and rivaled any in the kingdom. To mark the king and queen's anniversary, he turned the water in the castle fountain into the finest champagne. Queen Bea quickly gave him a place within the royal court, including his own quarters and all the specialist equipment he needed. There was something about Mineo's manner that pleased the queen. Others at the court flattered her and told her pretty lies, but Mineo was not like that. He may have been a sorcerer, but it dealt with facts. Right now, he stood looking dispassionately at the queen's newly pregnant belly. His face was young, but his eyes were old, and he might have been handsome if only he smiled. He had a very small pointed beard, and wore a floppy yellow hat with a black feather tucked into its brim, his only frivolity. He carried a wand that was black and fine, like a switch. Right now, he turned it over and over with his slender fingers. "There are certain spells I can cast to protect you and the newborn. Would you like me to proceed?" The queen nodded and smiled. She enjoyed watching him work. Mineo looked to the ceiling. hands raised on either side of his head, and began to mumble a string of unintelligible sounds that grew louder until he was almost shouting. He swished the wand around him, creating a sparkly sheen in the room, like dust caught in a shaft of sunlight. "This charm of protection will last for 6 new moons, enough to take you through your confinement. As long as the birth takes place in this room, then your health and that of the newborn is guaranteed." "Thank you, Mineo," said the queen. Mineo inclined his head toward her. "And would you like a guard to watch over you and the new baby?" The king nodded. "Yes, that would put all our minds at rest." This time Mineo took the black feather from his hat, threw it in the air, and pointed his wand toward it, his arm extending swiftly. There was a screech and a blaze of blue light in the corner of the room. The king and queen both jumped at the sound, then laughed, embarrassed. A large bird with black feathers, a black beak, and a flash of white at its throat perched on the washstand. A raven. The sorcerer approached the bird, which seemed perfectly tame, and ran a long pale finger lightly along its head and back. The raven did not appear to mind his touch. "This is Corvus. He will sit in the corner of the room to watch over you. He will not disturb you, and does not require food or water. If you leave the window open, he will attend to his own needs." "The fresh air will be welcome," said the queen. The king raised his eyebrows. "An unusual childminder." "Not at all," said the sorcerer. "Ravens make excellent guards. They are highly sensitive, intelligent communicators, and display great loyalty." Right now, the raven did not appear to be doing any communicating. He nestled his head under his wing and closed his eyes. "I like him," said the queen. "If he pleases you, my dear, then we shall keep him." "But, Mineo, we invited you here with a specific question," said the king. "There has been a suggestion that the queen may be carrying more than one child. Can you confirm or deny this?" Mineo shook his head slowly and steepled his fingers. "Alas, this is a skill I do not possess. I have practiced alchemy and potion making, but I cannot predict the future. The craft of fortune-telling is less precise than my own. It requires a level of intuition and faith that I cannot claim. For that, you need a seer." The seer. The seer from the town was brought to the queen's bedchamber that very afternoon. She was old, older than anyone else in the city. No one could remember her as a girl apart from the old footman Bork before he had passed. It took a long time for her to climb the steps to the south tower. When she entered the queen's chamber, she stood still for some time, regaining her breath. She looked out through the window beyond the city's walls and shook her head in amazement. "Such a view you have from the very top of the castle. I have never climbed so high, not even in my youth, when I would think nothing of ascending the Grey Mountain." She paused, remembering. "I would strip as naked as the day I was born and bathe in the waterfall up there. Not a soul to see me apart from the birds." Corvus cawed, and the seer coughed, a hacking cough that went on for some moments. The king smiled politely. "Can we get you anything? Some sweet mint tea, perhaps?" He pointed to the silver teapot at the queen's bedside. The seer shook her head, still coughing, and continued staring out of the window. "From here I have a view of a bird. I can see the city laid out below us." Her coughing eased, and she raised a hand. "I can also see the future coming. It is a dark cloud. Great change is on its way. And where is the midnight unicorn? The creature has not been seen for some weeks. Will it be there to protect Essendor in our time of need?" She turned and stared at the queen. Queen Bee said nothing, but gazed out of the window as if she too could see the dark cloud. The king nodded. "And so, can we attend to the matter at hand? The royal baby, or babies?" The seer nodded. She walked to the bedside and unlaced the queen's outer robes, placing her hands on the gentle swell of the queen's belly. "I will need your wedding ring," said the seer. The queen twisted the narrow band of gold from her ring finger. She handed it to the seer, who threaded it onto a long green silken thread. "What?" said the king. "We bring this woman all the way up here, and she performs the old ring on a string trick? Anyone can do that. Nanny did it on my mother. The string swung back and forth, and she knew I was a boy." The seer spoke quietly. "Anyone can make a lucky guess. Sometimes the signs need someone who can actually read them." The queen narrowed her eyes at her husband. "Yes, let the seer do her job." The king slumped into a chair and said nothing more. The seer dangled the wedding ring over the belly of the queen. It remained motionless. Then the seer began to hum, a strange low sound like a lullaby. The ring began to move, slowly in a circle, and then faster, turning round and round in a clockwise direction. "Daughter," said the seer, her voice barely above a whisper. "A strong, healthy daughter." The ring stopped moving, and the queen smiled at her husband. "A healthy daughter. Just the one." The seer put her crooked finger in the air for silence. "Wait!" The ring on the thread started moving again, circling in the opposite direction. The motion was barely perceptible, but gradually grew quicker as it had done the first time. The seer nodded. "Seems the signs were true. There is another daughter, a twin. Her voice is not as strong as the first, but she is there. They are growing alongside one another." The queen sat up in bed and held her head. "No, it cannot be true. I don't want it to be true." This time she threw her teacup on the floor, which didn't make nearly as much a mess as the egg had done. The lady's maid swept up and reported back to Nanny, and they both shook their heads and smiled. It was natural for any woman to worry about her firstborn, and of course that worry would increase with a multiple birth. "She will soon get used to the idea and see this for the blessing it is," said Nanny. The lady's maid nodded. "The queen has been on the throne for 5 years. It is about time she produced an heir. 2 at once can only be a good thing." As the queen's belly grew in size, few would have doubted that she was carrying more than one infant, and the queen seemed happy now, stroking her swollen stomach in rhythmic circles. She insisted on continuing with her active lifestyle, pottering around in the rose garden, singing, playing the piano, and even swimming well into her 3rd trimester. "Who are we to question the habits of the royal family? They often act in stranger ways than this," Nanny said one day, pursing her lips. "All this activity will keep her fit for birth," said the lady's maid. "Queens do not have to worry about that. She will have the most experienced women in the city in attendance. I, for one, will make sure I see these babies safely into the world, and of course she is tall. Tall women have twins easily. I predict it will be like shelling peas for her." It was not quite as easy as shelling peas. The birth. The pain started when the queen was in the rose garden. She had insisted on rising, as she wanted to see her new yellow roses. They were a new species named after her, Bea, a deep yellow, the color of the double egg yolk, and with the scent of nasturtium and lemon. "The scent is best in the mornings," she insisted, and so, while the sun was barely peeping over the horizon, her lady's maid accompanied her carefully down the stone steps of the south tower and into the rose garden. There were maybe 15 varieties of rose in bloom, red, pink, and white. But it was the special yellow ones that drew the queen. She buried her face in the blooms and drank in their aroma. As she straightened up, she gasped and said a few unqueenly words. The lady's maid offered an arm to steady her. "Is it birthing pains, your majesty?" The queen nodded, breathing steadily through her mouth and confirming the maid's worst fears. Why, oh why, did they have to happen now? She had never attended a birth, and was unsure how long the whole procedure took. Would she have to deliver twins right here in the rose garden? "We need to get you back to your bedchamber, ma'am." The queen shook her head. "No, I want to give birth here, where the air smells sweet, and I can look upon my favorite blooms." The lady's maid was a little flustered. "What about the charm of protection, ma'am? The sorcerer said that it was put upon your royal bedchamber alone." "I have a feeling that all will be well with the birth. These roses are charmed by the sorcerer himself, and I could not be in any sweeter location." The queen bent over as a new wave of pain washed over her. The voice of the lady's maid grew higher and panicky. "It would not be seemly, ma'am. Anyone might walk into the rose garden." Right now, she was hoping that someone would walk into the rose garden and rescue her. "Help! Someone help! The queen is in labor!" she cried eventually. Windows all around the courtyard banged open, and courtiers in their nightcaps flooded to the rose garden to assist. A messenger was sent to the south of the city to instruct 2 wise women to attend the royal bedchamber. The king, Nanny, and the lady's maid bustled Queen Bea back up to her bedchamber in the tower, stopping on every 7th stair for the pains to disperse. The lady's maid needn't have worried about the babies rushing into the world, because the labor was a long and drawn-out affair, which lasted all day and into the night. Corvus the raven perched alert and unblinking on the washstand. The queen couldn't forget about the blooms of her yellow roses, and repeatedly requested to see them. Eventually the king sent for the gardener and ordered him to cut every yellow bloom from the fronts of the bushes. He came back with armfuls of flowers, which were placed in vases and bowls around the queen's chamber. As soon as the queen smelled the roses, her mood improved and she was calmer. "Care and joy," she muttered. "The perfect flowers for my newborns." From then on, the birth proceeded smoothly. Any doubts about the sorcerer's protective spell were negated when, around midnight, 2 healthy twin girls came into the world. One baby was long and strong, with a birthmark on her left cheek and a full head of hair. The other was smaller and bald, but still healthy and hungry. The queen lay in bed with one baby at each breast, and the king came in to meet his daughters. Delighted, he took each one in turn, and held them proudly. "Heirs to the kingdom! Which is the firstborn?" "The taller one," said the queen. "Then she shall be heir," said the king. "But in this kingdom the law states that twins may rule together if the first is willing." "Time alone will tell if that is a good idea." The queen nodded. "I am worried for my daughters. Like the seer, I can feel the dark cloud approaching. What will it mean for this next generation?" Nanny tutted and smoothed out the sheets at the bottom of the bed. "Don't you worry about all that now, your majesty. One thing at a time. Firstly, these children need names." The king smiled. "We already have names prepared. All we have to do now is decide which name belongs to which daughter." "I can guess that one will take your mother's name," said the nanny. "No," said the queen. "We shall call our firstborn Alette, meaning truth. Her sister will be Audrey, meaning strength, for truth and strength are surely the greatest gifts we can bestow." News of the twin princesses spread quickly through the city, though their names were not released at this point. "We will know when the time is right," said the queen, "when I am sure that my children are safe." The news was celebrated in many different ways across the kingdom. 2 royal babies, after a 5-year wait was happy news indeed. Near to the castle there were street parties with jugglers and banners and roasted chestnut sellers in the streets. Farther out in the kingdom there were fairs and fetes. Some used it as an excuse to open long-kept bottles of blackberry wine and fall down drunk in the street. But in a far-off corner of the kingdom, by the rocky west coast, there was one who did not celebrate the news. A message had been sent to the queen's brother. "This is not what I had hoped for," he said to his messenger. "I had hoped that childbirth would take her, as it does so many women. And 2 babies." He shook his head. "But the infants can be taken care of. Yet while the queen is weakened, and the midnight unicorn has not been sighted for some time, well, this may be the perfect moment." And that is the first 3 chapters of The Midnight Unicorn. It's very exciting. Some intrigue, some family drama, and a mysterious unicorn that goes around saving people. And it's not your normal white, glistening white unicorn. It's a black unicorn, midnight dark. So jet black fur on its coat. So different, exciting, fun. Sounds like there's going to be a lot of adventure, and sounds like the daughters are taken away or something because of what I read in the back. And Alette and Audrey were the 2 on the back that grew up in different places, and that's the names of the queen's daughters. So sounds like it's a tale of mystery. So I can't wait to get in and read the rest. I'm excited to get into this series. Again, my link to my bookshop is on the video, so if you liked it and want to read more, you can order them through there. But if not, I hope you enjoyed this reading, and I will see you again Tuesday to continue Anne of Green Gables. I thank you again, and I hope you have a wonderful